Have you ever wondered how the hell are fairy types completely immune to dragon? Well, it actually makes sense. Let's find out how. Generally speaking, Pokemon's type properties are logical. Types that are based on simple concepts like materials or elements are easier to make a clear counter and effective type matchups. It's only when a type's concept is more vague is where things start to become confusing. Types like normal, dark, psychic, fighting, and of course fairy. As evidently seen by the poster Pokemon of the fairy typing, they're meant to represent nature, natural life forces, as well as good fortune, all elements of actual fairies in mythology. Why is poison and steel super effective against it? Well, thinking back to the medieval times, steel represents unnatural, man-made manufacturing and occupation. Knight's armor and steel weapons were advancements from the more natural materials like wood. Sort of like how our modern technological world has had a negative effect on some of the natural forces of life in nature. And poison is basically only intended to kill things it's used on, so it definitely goes against fairy's theme. But then why are fairy types super effective and completely immune to dragon? Well, based on more European depictions of dragons, since that's where traditional fairies come from, dragons usually symbolize chaos, destruction, greed, and evil! So, fairy representing life, nature, and purity will always triumph over evil, as well as the word fairy in the Middle Ages being used as an adjective to mean enchanted, like an enchanted knight going to slay a dragon. So on a metaphorical level, it does make sense. But this is where things get a bit messy. Fairy is not very effective against the two types it's weak against, and fire. Fire represents natural forces of destruction and change, so it makes sense that fairy won't be effective against it. But most dragons can breathe fire, even in Pokemon when they aren't even fire type. Heck, Palkia's second typing is water. And on top of that, moves like Dragon Claw and Draco Meteor being a literal asteroid are all negated completely by fairy, but moves like Fury Swipe and Rock Slide, which are basically the same thing, all work on fairy. So metaphorically, fairy's strengths against dragon makes sense, but on a physical standpoint, the complete immunity to dragon is just ridiculous. But at the end of the day, fairy is meant to be a counter to dragon for balanced reasons regardless of the logic. But there is a type even more confusing, the dark type. Now looking at the name alone, it's very vague. Dark what? But the original Japanese translation more directly translates to the evil. It doesn't sound as cool as dark, but makes more sense. Why is it super effective against psychic and ghost? Well, psychic refers to inner peace and living in a zen-like state to have the ability to achieve things through one's mind. So it makes perfect sense for the evil type to be psychic's counter and have complete immunity to it, because the malice presence of an evil force will always disrupt the calmness and peace of a Zen master's mind, as shown countless times through media, except when some sort of miracle hero comes along. Now, ghostly spirits aren't always bad. Neutral ghosts, if anything, are seen as more vulnerable as they are just wandering souls without a body, and this is exactly what an evil type would look to prey on. And that's why fairy is super effective against dark, because it's a symbolic representation of goodwill and nature, which makes it an appropriate counter to like it was with the X and Y legendaries. So then, why is fighting type also Dark's counter? Well, in complete contrast to psychic types, fighting type Pokemon are those who channel their aggression and practice of physical martial arts to fight and defend. Sort of like how Anakin prefers to use his lightsaber attacks, physical prowess, and aggressive force abilities to overpower enemies, while Obi-Wan tries relying on the Force to predict, defend, and defeat his opponents through their own mistakes. Which is exactly why Psychic is super effective and always wins against the more arrogant fighting types, but fighting types having no fear to go up against evil forces and beating them no problem. And because fighting types are kinda like berserkers, it makes sense that they are the only counter to the normal type, as they are based off of more conventional concepts and themes we see in our day-to-day world. And which is exactly why both normal and fighting can't affect ghost types, and vice versa, as ghosts can't interact with our physical plane. Sort of. But there's still one type that doesn't make any sense. Why does Bug counter Psychic and Dark, and fighting being not very effective against it? Don't we squish bugs? Well, yes, but a bug's exoskeleton is mainly comprised of chitin. When this is mixed with a certain amount of proteins, it's what gives most bugs their protective outer layer that kind of looks like armor. So increase these bugs to man size and yeah, that flip-flop isn't gonna work. But the one drawback is that it's kind of heavy, so depending on the anatomy of the bug, it can make them really slow but have a decent defense and attack, or provide little protection but more flexibility. And you have to remember that bugs are completely running off instinct. Mind games, evil presences, and forces won't work on them because they don't really think at all. They just want to eat, survive, and get ripped. Which is why the two types that rely on pressuring the mind and mood of the other Pokemon are trumped by brain-dead death machines. So then, if Pokemon type properties make logical sense, what would happen if we introduce a new type? And do we even need to? Find out in this video here.